And then like 5, 10 minutes later, there's another guy that walks in the door, huge, right? I'm like, I'm at the other end of the facility. I'm like, wait a minute, that's John Cena.
John Grace, head of performance for the first team and the academy for the Chicago Fire, a good buddy of mine. Very fortunate to say that over the last few years. Thank you for joining. Tell me something good that's going on in your life, and then we will get into it.
Hey, thanks, Matt, for having me. It's really awesome to be on the podcast. And yeah, so something good in my life. I mean, I've kind of been a ghost on social media, and it's just because I don't have much to say anymore. Maybe I once did or once thought I did. I thought maybe I was smart at one point. Is I had kids, and probably they're 1.5 now, but that's probably been the best thing that's happened in my life over the last couple of years. That's something that I've personally always wanted, and me and my wife had always wanted, and we were blessed with two, a boy and girl. So that's been the best thing that's happened to me. It's very difficult to keep everything else in your life on track with that going on, but a lot of fun, a lot of difficulties, but a lot of fun.
Fantastic. I'm a twin as well. Fun fact.
Oh, you really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that. It's so funny when we had twins. You tell everybody, oh, it's twins and blah blah blah, and then everybody out of the woodworks, I'm a twin, or my brother's a twin, and I'm like, how are there this many twins in the world? Like a guy that I worked with for 5 years, he's a good friend of mine, and I knew he was a twin, but it's crazy the people you come across that are like, I'm a twin, or I know whatever, I have twins. Yeah, actually, I work with uh, um, 2 or 3 people with twins, and then I know of twins, a set of twins that I work with, and so on and so forth. So interesting how that happens.
Crazy. My mom told me the story growing up where she was in a twins club where every Tuesday morning, I guess, they would go to the local mall back when malls were like a thing. Before I could remember any of this, and there was like just 12 sets of twins that would just like run around and just wreak havoc. Um, but so John Grace is going on the end of year five. Is this year six coming up with the fire?
Correct. That would be year 6. Yeah.
So I guess part of being able to manage twins is being pretty set or at least familiar with your job, and just a testament to you being there for that long, which is definitely more of an outlier than the norm, which I guess is kind of weird going on year six at a spot. Previous at Orlando City for 3+ years. I bet you like the winters here a lot more. And before that, some time with Mike Young at the Athletic Lab out in North Carolina. So, um, anything else kind of noteworthy that I kind of missed? And then if not, we will hop into it.
No, those were the big 3 spots in my career thus far. Athletic, as you mentioned, Athletic Lab kind of shaped a lot of how I train and how I think today. Obviously, specifically Mike and all the guys there that I coached with. And then, yeah, with Orlando, I was with the NWSL for 2, and then the men's club for 1. So that's an important distinction or note. But then, yeah, Chicago Fire for 5 years, going on 6, and roles with the first team in academy. So yeah, no, spot on for sure.
Fantastic. So over the last few years, we got connected through the grapevine. We've talked to everything from X's and O's to career stuff to everything in between. But we're here something a little bit new to frequent listeners of the podcast, going into some X's and O's, and then we'll get into the classic kind of career stuff. And also with this new kind of format change is a new sponsor, 1080 Motion, here to make speed happen. I've had a 1080 Sprint over the last 3+ years. Super good people over there, super good technology, and they're sponsoring this section, me saying this, John Grace. And the first question. So, what was that first kind of light bulb moment in soccer when you're just like, oh my gosh, this is such a big light bulb? Why I have to do this with everyone in every phase, or a big light bulb for addition, or with soccer players, a big light bulb of subtraction where something you realize maybe the juice wasn't really worth the squeeze, or you're just like, a little bit overrated, not really it for soccer players. Fit is an online programming software that helps you train more athletes in less time with greater individualization. For in person or remote training, Fit does so with a streamlined programming process, decision making trees to help you integrate data into your programming, as well as better communication with all pieces of a high performance model involved to break down silos. Learn more at fit.io, that's fytt.io, and tell them that Matt Tometz sent you.
Yeah, I'll try to maybe give one example of kind of each, one light bulb and maybe one that's not worth the squeeze. Eh, and it's not so much light bulb moment, I would say per se, because again, a lot of the principles, training principles that maybe I won't say I've developed, but I come to believe in, have been shaped from Athletic Lab and Mike. And so I carry those principles still. Now, the kind of methods to carry those principles out have adjusted or changed a little bit over the years, but I would say one that I feel like has held true, even though I've tried a few different things here and there, is that in season. So the MLS season is like 9 or 10 months long, depending on how far you go. And traditionally in textbooks, competition season is the time for hyper specific type training. And I don't think that that is the best way to go. Because, and the reason is that their sport training is the hyper specific training. Their competition is the hyper specific training. And so if I know I know maybe not everybody agrees with this, but when you layer hyper specific on hyper specific, meaning that if I'm trying to mimic or do the same thing as what they're already doing in training, I don't think that's the best way to go about doing some additional, say, strength or power work. I think you have to keep a lot of the weight room work, a lot of the speed work, or even conditioning work pretty general, especially if it's a healthy player that is going through their training and competition periods. I think any additional work, not any, but I think most of the additional work that you can do or should be pretty general in nature. I find that if you do too specific, layered on specific training, it's just I find that guys get injured or you're just overloading maybe certain muscles more or certain range of movements more. I think a little bit of specificity in there is okay. So to give an example, and this is just an observation I've made over the last few years. Say, for example, with sprinting, like a lot of the injuries occur at max velocity. Not all, but a large proportion of them occur at max velocity, in late swing phase. So what I've tried to do in the past is to layer in some specific. We have versa pulleys. So you could do like a versa pulley or a flywheel, essentially, like hip extension. Either you can do that supine or you can do that standing. To try to mimic the range of motion, to try to mimic the hip and knee angles that you'd see closely related to sprinting. And I just found that if I do that too long, I find that we have maybe a few more injuries. I don't have proof other than just kind of what I see and how I'm trying to figure out patterns of what's happening. But I find it if you're sprinting, which guys are at least once or twice a week, maybe once in training and maybe once in competition, max velocity, that doing more of the same range of motion, doing high velocity work on top of that, I just don't think works for too long. I found that personally, that if you keep it more slow, but still heavy eccentric, and sometimes maybe supramaximal eccentric, especially things like knee flexion, not specifically Nordics, but I prefer to use glute ham raise for a couple reasons. It's weird. I've just found that when I do that or when I incorporate those glute ham raise and different variations of it into the plan, it's weird. I can't explain it, but I just see guys in a better spot.
Yeah, which counts. That's real.
Yeah, and you know, again, just to kind of on the glute ham raise Nordic side, I think they're very closely related type of exercises, right? But I think in soccer specifically, a lot of Nordics get a lot of the research because they're easy to do. You can measure them and so on and so forth. Um, but I find that guys don't actually most guys can't complete them really well. So the range of motion that you're trying to train is the end range of motion typically. And when guys aren't strong enough, or maybe they weigh too much, and all of a sudden they can't control the eccentric portion at the longest range of motion, where you'd probably want them to be strong,
Yeah.
it might not be doing what we want it to do. So I find that glute ham raise is actually a little bit easier for guys to do. It's a tad more gentle depending on how you do it. Um, and guys can do it full range of motion. And there's ways to regress and progress to achieve the benefits based on the individual.
Mm.
You know, I just nothing against Nordics. I think they're fine, especially if individuals have the strength to go full range and do them fast or overloaded or whatever it might be. Just one of those things I've seen.
Mm.
So that again, to kind of go back to the original light bulb or kind of question on that is, I think staying pretty general within the training calendar and maybe at times being more specific uh, for especially rehab players, or maybe at times when uh, when the game density is not as big or as dense, I should say, then maybe you can sprinkle in some specific. But for me, it's I think you got to balance that. And if they are training hyper specific in training, you train 3 to 4 times a week and you compete once or twice depending on the calendar. Uh, I don't see the reason to add in or layer in a lot of specific work beyond that, if that makes sense. Um,
It's almost like applying a high-low model to just training stimuli itself of like if you have, obviously a super high stimulus in games, and then you have a medium high stimulus where it's like kind of specific, kind of high intensity lifting and kind of all these things, and it's kind of like this super high and then this medium kind of high stimulus. It's like no, like when are you supposed to bounce back? And not that lifting is intended to bounce back, but it's just to give a break from those specific kind of movement patterns and specific intensities and kind of things like that. And training is supposed to complement and well round, Like that's why there's not soccer balls and turf in a weight room.
no,
And
exactly right. And I think that the discussion sometimes I see is about transfer. And while I think it's a discussion that probably needs to be had at times, I don't think that's what it's all about personally. I
mm,
think, okay, if you can measure it and you can show that there's transfer, even better, right? Because that's the whole point of what we're trying to do. But sometimes it's also about not that they're mutually exclusive, but injury reduction and
just
longevity.
general prep,
Uh,
yeah.
yes, and right, and in most pro sports, the preseason is not long enough to do general prep, and the off season. You can't bank on guys doing it, and I'm not saying they don't, but
No,
there's a
it's
hand
it's true.
there's a handful of guys that don't. So you can't bank on that time being your general prep, because if they don't do it, then you've literally done no general prep. So what, you're supposed to just do 9 or 10 months of straight specific work for their entire career? I
Yeah.
don't see the longevity piece personally of how we're supposed to keep these guys healthy if that's the case.
Yeah, and with the transfer idea, and that's the argument for specificity. Well, I have two arguments for that. First is like, well, if someone's doing like banded dribbling and the coach has the band and stuff like that, it's like, well, that's so specific that like they're gonna be in soccer mode, so they're not gonna go as intense during the actual reps. But it's different enough with the band and not with defenders and and all these things to where it's like not gonna be that specific to the actual game, right? So you're trying to
Yeah.
do both of these things where you're consequently doing nothing. And
Yes.
with this idea of transfer, it's like my job is to make them better athletes when they start practice and they start games, they're the best athletes possible. And then the sport coach, takes the skills of speed and the skills of whatever it may be, and then turns it into, soccer specific in this case. So that's kind of how I
Yeah.
look at transfer.
Yeah, and I think that's I tend to agree. I think that's when transfer does occur is in sport training, right? I think there are certain things that you can utilize in terms of specificity. So just to provide one example, maybe it's a one-on-one drill um, where first they do 10-meter change of direction, right? So it's 10-meter sprint, 10-meter change of direction, and then maybe back into the grid where you're 1v1 with another player. So you're getting the specific component of 1v1 if that's the exercise or the drill or the technical aspect that you want to train is 1v1 defending, for example. But you can layer in maybe something like that, like a change of direction or a couple change of direction, 5-10 meters, to make it still physical. And maybe again, it's not specific because you're not, it's just a layer to the exercise.
Yeah.
And then guys, because it's a soccer drill, they might be more likely to give more intensity to that. And then on top of that, again, I don't have a drawing board or anything here, but if they are directly competing 1v1, there's intensity to those sprints to make sure that you are in good position to defend. Or if you're the offensive player, you can get to the ball first and score, right? So you're creating a situation where the intensity is driven by not wanting to fail in the 1v1.
Yeah.
And so that's again, I know that's maybe not quite transfer, but it's maybe more specific. So you can layer in some acceleration capacity or maybe some change of direction within the exercise itself to kind of make guys think that, okay, this is soccer, but no, it's still physical. Right.
It's all about tricking them. It's all marketing.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
I'll wrap this up with this. I saw a video of a mom saying just being a parent is marketing because the kid wouldn't eat uh chicken nuggets because they only eat chicken tenders. And then the mom was just like, these are just half chicken tenders. And the kid started eating it. And I was like, that's genius, you know? So sometimes you just gotta do the same with your athletes. And
Yeah.
what's funny is it's true.
Yeah.
All right. Coaches, this podcast is sponsored by Samson Equipment. They've been providing elite strength training equipment and professional weight room solutions since 1976. If you value quality products, great customer service, and a company with integrity, then make Samson Equipment your go-to. Visit them at samsonequipment.com. That's SAMSON Equipment, and let them know that Matt Tometz sent you. ISOFIT is not just pioneering isometric strength training, but they are opening up a brand new world of possibilities with health and performance benefits through isometric training and their own groundbreaking product. With patented force matching technology, they're reshaping the boundaries of functional health and human performance. Discover the future of health, fitness, and sports performance at isofit.com. That's ISOPHIT.com, and tell them that Matt Tillman sent you. So question 2 of 3 of our X's and O's is one of the more unique things about pro soccer, as I want to highlight your unique background relative to this podcast and all the guests and stuff, is just how extensive the academy is. And for those who aren't familiar, basically academy started like 12?
Yeah.
And more or less, if an athlete is good enough and wants to stick with enough, they could literally be with the Chicago Fire from 6th grade through making it to being a pro at 18, 19, 20. If they're good also, can't they be sold to leagues
Yes.
overseas, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
And just, even just like the minor leagues and farm systems, like those are guys once they're already adults. So like such a unique opportunity, or even I guess some of the Dominican leagues for the MLB teams, like that starts at I think like 16. So in your opinion, with these academies, what can someone learn? Let's say someone's at a college and they only have someone for 4 years. what can someone learn about having an academy of someone, 6, 8, 10 years? And then also, how can that apply to someone, let's say high school, where let's say they only train hard for like their last 2 years of high school? And then what could someone maybe in the private side who looks at things kind of 6 months at a time? Can they learn from just such an extensive academy?
Yeah, I think I think two things come to mind. I think one is that to not always, but to have a high chance of success at going to, say, pro level or whatever we call the next level, there does need to be some sport specificity or early specialization, if you will. I think there is this thought, and I somewhat agree, that if you play multiple sports, that you're more likely to be a more well-rounded, better athlete in the future. And while I would agree, and I think that's good because just talking about the idea of specific and general type training, the other sports, your secondary sport or your tertiary sport is general to the one that you actually want to improve or go further at. Um, but I do think that in high skill sports, so soccer, I'd call it's like, I don't know, I'd call it like 50-50, 50% skill, 50% physical, or maybe 60-40 skill, physical, if you will. Because there are plenty of guys that have high levels of skill and not a whole lot of physical ability, and they still make it to a pro level. Golf would be an example of probably 80-20, something like that.
90-10,
Yeah.
95-5.
Now I think you see a little bit different, but yeah, exactly right. The percentages maybe don't have to be exact, but I completely agree. Yeah. So whenever there's a high level of skill involved within the sport, I think you need to train that sport a little bit more than if it was pure physical alone. And even then swimmers swim from 12, 13 years old, or even sooner than that. You see track guys, being a track and field athlete for a long portion of their lifetime. So yeah, you have these anomalies where a guy can be really, really good at two or three sports. But you see all over Twitter, probably a couple of years ago, whenever all the debates were, is like, these guys probably aren't really good at their sport because they played two or three sports. They're just freak genetic athletes, which allowed them to be good at multiple sports. It's not the other way around. And I believe that. I think not necessarily early specialization, but specialization to an extent. I think you just have to. If you can't just specialize at, for example, 18, 19 years old and expect to go pro 4 years later. Maybe that's a wrong thing to think. But I just see it within the academy. I've seen 16, 17-year-old guys get signed. And, I know this is a different sport where most other sports in the US aren't signing players at 16 and 17 years old to pro contracts. So yeah, I do think maybe soccer is a little bit different in the United States as to compared to NFL or basketball, where basketball you have to have, I think the rule is still 1 year in college, unless
Yeah.
they've changed it, which I heard them maybe talking about that we're going to change it. But anyway, and the NFL, I think, is what you have to spend 2 years in the
At
collegiate
least two,
system.
yeah.
Yeah.
And be 21 or something like that.
Yeah. So you have these things built into the other pro sports that don't allow you to do that. Maybe for good reason, especially the NFL. I could maybe see NBA. It's not necessary per se. But in soccer, you can sign a player. Philadelphia, and I can't remember the age of the kid, but Philadelphia Union just signed a 15-year-old to a pro contract. Again, the age I might be completely wrong. It might be 14 and a half, 15. But anyway, very young player. When I first came in 2020 to Chicago, we signed 5 or 6 what are called homegrown players at 15, 16, 17 years old. And so those guys are, no disrespect, they're boys amongst men. And there's still really prime time to develop those players. So again, sports specialization at some point in probably mid-teens, I think, is necessary. truly have a shot at the next level. Um, Unless you're an outlier, couple percenter where you're just freak genetically. But then also, I think one of the things that I think within our academy that we really try to focus in on is a relationship with the sport coach or the technical coach, if you will. And I think a lot of times, especially in a private setting, because I've been in a private setting, I can tell you that maybe I should admit, but I've never spoke to a sport coach when I was in a private setting. You know, we just trained the athletes, right? Um, and I think also sometimes in the high school setting, and I want to preface, I've never coached specifically at the university setting, and I've never coached the high school setting, but I've coached athletes within those realms before in the private setting. But at the high school setting and the university setting, I've heard stories and I've heard things where those coaches won't even go out and watch training. And so I wonder how much they're actually in communication with the sport coach themselves, right? I think that is very useful. If you are a strength conditioning coach, performance coach, I think you have to be pretty well connected to the coaching staff or the head coach at the very minimum. Because again, going back to the last kind of question, if you are just repeating from a either conditioning standpoint or a weight room standpoint, all the things that they just did in training, it doesn't make sense. So if you don't know exactly what's going on, that could be from just receiving training plans of what the specific or what the sport training is, or more specifically going out or indoors and actually watching the training session, I think is very necessary. I had heard, I spoke to somebody at big time D1 track and field school, and he's a good friend. And he said that their kind of strength and conditioning coach, which a lot of times in track and field and universities, the technical coach is kind of writing the weight room plan because they are usually very good at that, and probably better than a lot of strength and conditioning coaches in general, because they have to be one and the same. But he said that their weight room coach wouldn't even go out and watch their track training. And I'm just like, how is that possible? How do they even know what you guys did? How do they
I
know
loved
what to
watching swim
expect?
practice. I learned a lot. Yeah.
and I think that yeah, you learn a lot about you see players and you see athletes. You can learn their body language about what's going on, and or if they have something happen during training, but they can still be in the weight room. Okay, well, we need to modify this, right? Or we need to adjust this, or we need to do this on the fly. A lot of things are lost when I think you don't watch training, or at the very minimum are connected with the sport coaches. And again, this is not specific to, say, an academy program per se, but I think one thing that we've really tried to do is have our performance coaches and our medical staff really well connected with the sport coaches to have the understanding of both realms, to have that communication pathways as open as possible, so that we are helping to influence some trainings at some point in terms of the physical loading, but then also, they're giving maybe us feedback on players and what they might see and what does this player need? Can we adjust their plan a little bit? Because this is my plans with their minutes on the weekend, right? It all marries together. And if you miss something, it could be, it can change what happens to that player, right?
Yeah.
Again, you can never predict injury by any means. But all those things factor together to generate an outcome. And you always want that outcome to be as positive or beneficial as possible for the player.
And if we know that it's all supposed to come back to the sport anyways, then you might as well know the sport coach and watch and know what's going on and things like that. I guess at an academy, it's just easy because it's literally all under one roof. But the moral of the story is do what you can within your setting to get the sport specific things, at least not from for me turning into a soccer coach, but like, okay, no, I know the language, I know the flow of practice, I can read a practice plan. The sport coach can just trust me, know that I'm a decent person because I care, and just like there's a big benefit to going that little bit extra mile. I guess it's just a little bit easier to do so, kind of maybe in an academy. Um,
Yeah, and like I said, I don't take it for granted, like you said, that we're under the same roof. And I know maybe that's not always the case with university or even high school, even. But yeah, I'd say do as much as you can to be around it
mm,
as
mm,
often as possible within the time constraints that you have. If you, especially in university, you might have multiple teams, right? So maybe you've got another team in the weight room when the other team that you have is actually training. So there's constraints around it, and maybe you can't do that, but at least stay connected and say, okay, what's the training plan? What do you see out of these guys? Let me know your thoughts after training so we can adjust according, for the weight room this given day or whatever it
mm.
might be.
Exactly, exactly. So last question. We'll go speed question, sponsored by 1080 Motion. Make speed happen. Boom. I'm getting better at this. In general, what is one thing you think that the soccer world, from a performance standpoint, can do a little bit better?
Yeah. Um, it's hard because again, I just said that you can't predict injuries and you can't, and but you can do a lot of things to help mitigate some risk. And I think specifically with hamstring injuries in soccer, it's a very not hot topic, but it's always the cause for discussion. Hamstring injuries account for like 40 or 50% of all muscular injuries.
Wow.
And depending on the research you look at, I'm pretty sure it's upwards of 50%. Yeah. Um, Specifically bicep femoris long head. I think of that 40-50%, 60-ish% is bicep femoris long head. So you have a lot of commonalities in the same injury. Um, and those injuries aren't reducing. They're at the very minimum, they're staying the same or increasing. Um, and and so why is that? We have more personnel, we have more resources, we have more technology, we have everything at our disposal. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of organizations have a lot of new things that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we didn't have. And now, again, this is not a bad thing, but we have a staff of 9 or 10 between performance and medical. Um, and yeah, I'm not saying that one person is better than 9 people or 10. That's not what I mean. But we have more resources. That's more what I mean. And
Mm.
we're still having a lot of these issues. So I think one thing that is now coming out in literature, especially on hamstring injuries, and I don't think one thing is ever the answer, but 5 or 10 years ago, strength was the answer, right? Let's get our hamstrings really strong, and that will clear everything up. At least that's what the research shows. Yeah, do I think strength is especially eccentric strength, especially one aspect? Yes, I do. I'm a believer that that is one aspect, but of how many, that I don't know. I think there's plenty. Um, I think a bigger one that again I think is being spoke about now or written about in literature is sprint mechanics. And I think a lot of soccer, football guys, not American football, sorry, soccer, what the world calls football, um, hasn't had exposure to is sprint mechanics or sprint training. And I think now Yurdaman Nukuchia, his kind of research group, has put out a little bit more material on things like anterior pelvic tilt, general sprint mechanics, backside mechanics and things like that. Is okay, how can we measure these things and what is the relationship? And I think what a lot of track coaches knew a long time ago, we're talking about decades ago, is now finally just being written about, in terms of sprint mechanics being an influence of hamstring injuries. And like I said, I don't think that is solely the answer, but I think it is a big answer, in my
Mm.
opinion. Yeah, obviously there's fatigue, there's general condition of the muscle, there's strength of the muscle, there's perturbations that a player receives or an athlete receives when they're doing things on the pitch. There's stretching injuries, right? So there's things you can't necessarily prepare for. Um, but of the things that you can control and of the things that you can prepare for, I think sprint mechanics can be an aspect.
Mm.
And I think that's one thing that maybe we could add or do better. Because I think the thought a lot of times is, okay, these guys are, a lot of times 22 to 32 years old, and sometimes maybe 18 to 32 years old, whatever the roster makeup you have. And okay, these guys are done developing. We can't change. It's hard to change, or the time spent. There's a trade-off, right? There's cost benefit of spending the amount of time for what type of change. What change are we looking for, and can we even make it? And that's a question that you have to ask, right?
Mm.
If a guy has no hamstring injuries and they sprint quote unquote like shit and they look bad, would I change them? Would I want it? No, probably not. Especially if they're late 20s, early 30s. No, no. Do I, as a coach, I have to make that decision. Do I want to do that? And the answer is probably not.
Mm.
But if a guy has had multiple hamstring injuries over their career, or maybe even over a season, is that something that we should look at? Absolutely. Again, maybe that's not the culprit, but if they are showing the suboptimal sprint technique or sprint patterns, if you will, I think that is something that is a reasonable ask to change or spend the time to try to change, because we now have actual research showing that those aspects are, number one, changeable,
Mm.
and they influence injury. We knew about this a long time ago. It's not to say that this just all of a sudden influenced this aspect. Again, I was lucky enough to be around a really good track coach, and actually multiple coaches that I've coached with that are in track and around track for their whole life. And this is just something that those individuals inherently knew, and they passed along, and now it's coming out that is true.
Mm.
At least the people who wait for literature to come out, it's true, right?
Mm.
And I think that's one aspect that in soccer maybe we can adopt a little bit more is, we don't have to sprint like a track guy. I'm not saying that, but basic mechanics, basic things. Do I think we can influence? Yes, I do.
Mm. Boom, mic drop. And with
Yeah.
that, we will move on to the more traditional um, TSP, MTPP. I rebranded my podcast. Kind of questions. Kind of what brought us all here at the beginning, but what is the kind of biggest fork in the road story? So looking back, kind of that first moment in your journey that if you had taken a left instead of a right, or that break had gone your way versus had not, it's like, holy crap, this would all be way, way different.
Yeah, I think there's two that come to mind. My one first decision was, I grew up in upstate New York. It's where my most of my family lives still, my immediate family and extended. So it was tough, and I was one of the first in my immediate family. It was the first to actually leave. Want to do something else and want to go somewhere else. I don't know why I wanted to go somewhere else. I just think I wanted to just go on my own and do something. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. I have a bachelor's degree in marketing.
Wow.
Yeah, so not a lot of people know that. You could figure it out. But I have a bachelor's degree in marketing, and in my senior year of university, my undergrad, I kind of realized I really liked this stuff, meaning performance training and training in general. But it was really, really late in my undergrad career, if you will, to change. And I was just like, all right, let me just graduate, and then I'll figure out if I want to do that, and I'll figure out how to do it. So after I graduated, I spent a year still in upstate New York, kind of bouncing around at different jobs and, normal stuff, retail, all the stuff that you wouldn't want to do or wouldn't see a career in or whatever. Right. And I had a friend, and a good friend, and I am in debt to for the rest of my life, for sure. Uh, he was in North Carolina, and he said, "Hey, just come down and visit, see if you like it, and then you can figure it out." I packed up my car, with a few bags, whatever I had, and drove down and stayed with him. And I stayed with him for years. And again, I'm very much in debt to him because there were times where I was making very little money and couldn't really pay him anything. So he's just a tremendous friend. And I'm a type of guy, unfortunately, I don't keep up with people very well, but, and I'm sure he won't listen to this, but tremendous person, tremendous friend to be able to do that, and allow me to explore kind of other career paths, if you will. And, from there, kind of all these little mini things that I did that were just like on a whim. I started doing some personal training just to kind of get my foot in the door. And I was hired on at the exact same time as this track and field athlete. And so naturally, when you get hired on with somebody, you speak and he's the guy that I just spoke to because all the other guys were established and you're just trying to figure things out together, right? And he goes, well, if you want to do this performance training thing, he goes, I train with a guy out of Cary, North Carolina, or Athletic Lab. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that is, but okay, I'll go check it out. I go walk in the door. This is maybe a week later after that. And I'm like, oh, can I do an internship? I have no idea. Like, I just walk in. I don't know who's there. I don't know who Mike Young is. I don't know anything. Just totally didn't even look at the website, which I should have, right? But I walk in, I'm like, can I do an internship? Like, I'm working personal training, but I'm happy to come in for a few hours. I just want to be around it. Luckily for me, their intern currently that they had was leaving. And they're like, oh, you got an open spot. And they were still a pretty young company. And they were like, okay, well, nobody else really wants to be an intern or asking to be an intern. So yeah, sure, you can do that. Like so
Crazy.
lucky. Because right now, I'll tell you that Athletic Labs internship is super competitive. And again, if I laugh because if I applied, say now or a couple of years ago, I wouldn't get in because I had undergrad in marketing. It's just weird, like
Crazy.
the timing of
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so yeah, that was the first series of things that kind of changed my life, if you will. Um,
I
yeah,
I look back at my time at TC Boost when I went to 7 different facilities, I think it was Thanksgiving break my sophomore year of college. And TC Boost was the first one on my list. And I just remember like I just walked in and my boss was there and then her name was Ali Boudreau, but when she was working there. And just like some guy just walks in one day and then I've been like a decent part of that company over the last 6 years. It's just crazy to kind of think about like someone can just walk in the door and the rest is kind of history.
yeah, yeah, exactly right. So kind of got my start there, and it ended up, funny after the fact. I look up Mike Young, and he's as still even at the time, and this was, gosh, was it 24, 25, so 12, 13, 14 years ago, whatever it was, 12, 13, 14 years ago. He had just started Athletic Lab a few years before that, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. So still pretty young in terms of the lifetime of the business. But that again was a great relationship to start with. And probably good for me that I didn't really know the gravity of the place I walked into. I just thought that this was how you train people. Luckily I didn't walk into another building because maybe I wouldn't be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
But I luckily went in with some great coaches, was around some great athletes, was around, Mike and his philosophy and his training methods. And, that was, it shaped pretty much my career and shaped a lot of how I think. But then say second fork in the road, if you will, is I left North Carolina. And that was to actually follow Mike. Mike got a gig in Vancouver Whitecaps to be their performance coach. And I kind of just asked him again, like, hey, do you need an intern? Like, I'd be willing to move into Canada to
Another
to
internship.
to be your intern. Yeah, exactly. Because you know, I was thinking, okay, I didn't have a significant other, I didn't have kids, I didn't have any responsibility. So it's like, okay, well, if I need to spend a year and make no money, I'd be willing to do that and then just see what happens, right? Um, And he's like, well, he goes, selfishly, I want you there because I think I kind of held some things down in terms of like, being eye for detail at the facility. But he's like, if this is what you want to do, I can try to make it happen. And so he again allowed that to happen. And funny enough, it was like a week or 48, 72 hours before I was supposed to go to Vancouver because that I kind of just said, okay, he spoke to other staff and he managed to get an internship position like that. It was relatively unpaid. And he goes, they pulled the internship, meaning that they weren't going to sponsor it. So obviously, because it was another country. And he's like, well, he goes, you can just come and do that and kind of just figure it out, you know, have no visa, blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah.
in a different
And
country,
yeah, yeah. So again, maybe we're beyond the statute of limitations of anything I did wrong here. So,
This is
but I'm
off the
like,
record.
I'm like, again, I can't remember. I'm like 25. I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm just gonna do it because I didn't. Now would I do that? Probably not. I'm like, oh, that's way too illegal. Uh, you know, but at the time, I'm like, whatever. Like, what's the worst thing they're gonna do? Send me back to the United States? That's a pretty good life.
Yeah,
And then not allow me to come to Canada for a certain period of time. Okay, that's if that's the thing that they're gonna do, I'd be willing to risk it. Um, and so yeah, I went, and that was that, and kind of looking over my shoulder, like stupidly looking over my shoulder, like, oh man, I hope nobody knows I'm here. Nobody gives a shit that I'm here in Canada. I make no money, right? So I'm not taking anything from them. So that was the other one. It was a funny decision or a big decision that I had to make of like, what risk do I want to take to maybe make something happen? And yeah, I just went ahead and did it. And again, gave me that initial experience in MLS that I do think helped me get a position down the road a few years later.
crazy, crazy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be your coolest, craziest story if we had to move on to the next one.
That's a good one, but I think I might maybe have one to the top, at least for me. At least for me.
For sure. So we'll get into your coolest, craziest story, and then that'll be our last question for the pod to get you out of here on time.
Cool. Yeah, man. So coolest story. Again, you sent me some things yesterday, and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, I don't want to sound like an idiot. Maybe I don't have anything very cool. But then it came to my mind and it popped into my head. I'm like, oh, this for me is really cool and a moment I will never forget. So this was when I was at Athletic Lab, and um, we have I think Mike gets a call, or maybe his wife gets a call and says that some I can't remember if it was called WWF at the time or WWE, but either one. The WWE called and they said they want a few wrestlers to use our facility to train. And you know, I at the time I didn't follow wrestling, but I knew some of the bigger guys. And
Yeah.
when I was 12, 13 years old, that's all I watched, right? Monday Night Raw was my favorite thing on TV. Me and my brothers watched it all the time, right? The Attitude Era, the DX era, it was crazy. Um, and so I once was a big fan. And so I was like, oh, it'd be pretty cool if I knew somebody that walked in the door. And so the day comes and we have a staff meeting and the doors are open for the guys to come in, and it's two guys that I actually don't know. And I'm like, oh damn, that sucks. And then like 5, 10 minutes later, there's another guy that walks in the door, huge, right? I'm like, I'm at the other end of the facility. I'm like, wait a minute, that's John Cena.
No.
And yeah, and I'm like, no shit. And I don't get too starstruck anymore. And at the time, not really either. But I'm like, oh my God, this is John Cena. What the hell? Like this is effing cool. And so again, to kind of speed up the story a little bit, we got to train with John Cena. So yeah, man. So we got to train with John Cena and the two other guys. So the two other guys ended up being Cody Rhodes, who is now a huge, huge star in the WWE. At the time, all respect to him, he wasn't. But it's pretty cool to know now he is a huge star. And the other guy was Big E Langston. I think he goes by another name at the moment. But both of those guys kind of went on to be pretty good stars, especially Cody Rhodes, I think, is the champion or is a big face of the organization at the moment. But at the time, John Cena was really cool. You get to train with the guy and super humble. All the guys were great. Took pictures with you and everything, right? So kind of a sub story in this is we had facility records of power cleans and squats and all this stuff. And he for a big guy, he moves extremely well. He Olympic lifts with really good technique for a guy that size. I don't have big legs necessarily, but his bicep was as big as my thigh.
Crazy.
And people that know me know that's not very big, John, but his bicep was huge. So he's doing some full cleans, and again, my memory is probably foggy here, but maybe 150 on the bar, kilos. He's doing some full cleans with pretty much ease. Let's like he's just tuning up, really. He's not even doing a training session. And he's like, oh, I see all these facility records on the board, and he goes, what's the difference between a power clean and a clean? Right. And I'm surprised by the question because he's so competent in the lifts that, there's a few guys training with him. We just explained like, oh, the power clean is did you catch above parallel? And he goes, oh, so he throws on like a couple kilos more than the record, which I think was like 152 or 153. And he throws on a few more kilos, maybe 155 kilos or something like that. And he literally, like, I wish I could stand up and show this. He does the power clean so simply off the floor. He catches it in about a quarter squat, right? So not even at parallel, but at a
Standing,
quarter squat.
yeah.
And he's like, oh, is that it? Like with the bar on his shoulders. He's like, did I do that? We're like, yeah, that's it. That's a power clean. He's such a freak, man. And like the other guy, Big E Langston, he throws on the deadlift record and he does it for 10. And the deadlift record, I think, is like 160, 170, maybe even 180 kilos, something like that. He blows out the bench press record for again, double digit repetitions. It's just like these guys are on another level, man. So that is probably the one story that I will never forget. And it was just a really cool experience to get to train with John Cena. And, I've got my 80 kilo snatch bar next to his 120 kilo snatch. I'm like, man, I'm a skinny skeleton next to this guy, So it was a really fun experience that I won't forget though.
That's crazy. I'm glad we got to that question. So is John Cena on the record wall in Athletic Lab?
He was. There was a lot of discussion of whether he should be up because he wasn't a member, right? So it was mainly a record board for member, but we made an exception because it was so cool to put up on the board. And I think they'd recently, in the last year or two, had moved facilities. So I think a lot of the record board things are more internal now. So they used to be up on the windows and the board and the walls and everything. So at one point, yes, John Cena, the real John Cena, was up on Athletic Lab record walls. Yeah.
Absolutely bananas. Super
Yeah.
cool. So that is going to be all we have time for today. I want to got to almost everything.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much for your time, your openness, your honesty, and just kind of pulling back the curtain on high level soccer, your journey, kind of everything that's led us to now. So, and all the other phone calls that we've had kind of prior to this, thank you as well. But so now I want to roll out the red carpet for you, sir, to shamelessly plug, emphasis on shameless, whatever you want to plug from where people can get more of you. Gotta start selling out Soldier Field for the Fire, all the good stuff.
Yeah. If you're, hey, I will say if the season's, coming around and anybody's in Chicago, please hit me up if you want tickets. It should be no problem. Number one, I tend to just want to give them away to people. I don't care if I don't know you, I will give you tickets. Secondly, in terms of where you can find me, like I said earlier, I'm kind of quiet on social media now just because I don't think I have much to say. But you can find me at on Twitter, or what's X now, John_R_Grace. You can email me, jgrace2323@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions on anything that we talked about here or anything else. Um, in terms of Twitter, I haven't posted in probably a couple of years, but there's some old
A
archival
lurker.
thing, old archive. Yeah, exactly. I'm a lurker now. Old archive things that I think, maybe a couple things are good here or there. Some write again, I don't write much anymore, but some writings on places like elitetrack.com, simply faster. Yeah. So there are places you can find me, some of which are good info, some of which I squirm at reading again, or, knowing that I put that information out there, but it's out there. Right. So, that's where you can find me anyway.
Fantastic. So those will be in the show notes. Thank you very much for again for your time, and I look forward to talking soon.
Of course. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.